The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast as we reflect on the quarterfinals just gone. Leinster through to the semifinals this weekend against Toulouse. Munster falling foul of what was a very cruel sudden death penalty shootout. And La Rochelle scraping through as well. So Ronan O'Gara to face Racing in an all-French second semi-final. Delighted to be joined by Donal Lenihan and by Fiona Hayes. To look back, Donal, I know you were there, as you were you, Fiona. Time to reflect on things now. It's a horrible way to go out, given how well Munster played. But that's sport, right? There has to be a winner and there has to be a loser, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. But I think if you look at the occasion as a whole, I mean, right from I left Cork early on Saturday morning, looking forward to the trip, and I was just blown away by the amount of cars, the amount of red flags, you could see the jerseys, people sitting in the cars. Munster, to be fair, had this initiative where they gave subsidised buses to a lot of the clubs, and you could see the buses going up. Then, when the Cork-Limerick road merges there just before Port you could see all the flags coming up from the other side. So it was you were
beeping like mad at the Port flyover.
Exactly. Well, I tell you what I was doing. Typically, you crowd up in Dublin and Laois. You didn't realise there was a game on. They had 3 booths closed on the on the toll booth. So it took us 20 minutes to get through. You see, the country crowd are all coming up. So it's half you take a day off.
Why don't you get one of those tags, Donal, that I keep telling you to get and things? So you just zip through in the fast lane. It makes your life easier.
Yeah. Well, you have a tag, I have a car. That's the difference.
But
it was special. I mean, I was going to the match just an hour and a half, 2 hours beforehand, and just coming around the corner by the Lansdowne clubhouse, I was just this wall of people, and it was families together, like mothers, dads, kids, girls, boys, all waiting for the Munster coach, with the way the coach goes in underneath the Aviva Stadium. It was a brilliant sight. People were in the ground early. People actually sat in their seats and watched the match. There was none of this going in and out for beer in the middle of it. The atmosphere from day one was electric. It was reminiscent of the old 2006 Munster Leinster semi-final in the old Lansdowne Road. There was just so much colour, and I felt sorry for the 500 Toulouse fans who were kind of dwarfed into one corner. But look, brilliant occasion, great match. I'm sure we're going to talk about the merits or otherwise of a penalty shootout, but overall, for me, Munster turned up. They played to the best of their ability. They played great quality rugby. They weren't beaten in 100 minutes of action, and it comes down to a lottery in the end.
Yeah, it is a complete lottery, I guess. Even when you have 3 decent kickers on the pitch, Fiona, as we saw, because anything can happen. But Munster, I think that Munster outdid themselves. For a lot of people. I mean, I certainly didn't think they'd finish within 10 points of Toulouse. That's been honest. Like, just on the basis of what we've seen from Toulouse over the last 2 seasons, and I guess Munster, who have been improving, but I just didn't think that they'd be able to live with Toulouse firepower. But they did.
Yeah, they did. And, I suppose at the start of the game, I was a bit nervous looking at the scrum and scrum penalties and where that would have taken. But Munster seemed to settle down on that. I think Josh Wycherley was absolutely immense around the park, and he learned how to hold that scrum as well and stop that power, getting that quick strike in at times, which was really good. So, look, I believed you. I believed from day one when they got this match, and I knew even up with what Munster Rugby were doing outside, I knew there was going to be a big crowd. I knew people were annoyed a bit about the Ed Sheeran stuff, so they were really bringing their A game supporting wise. And when Munster have that kind of support, they seem to be lifted by the crowd, and they just played some excellent rugby. And I know the talk after is Peter O'Mahony and what he done around the pitch that day, but I think every single one of them put everything on the line for that game, and we saw it. And it was unfortunate the way the result ended up, but it was just exciting. I was up near the Toulouse fans. They weren't as loud as they normally are, but it was enjoyable. Everyone was enjoying the rugby, and that's what you want on a sunny day.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about the merits, I guess, of the penalty shootout, Don. I mean, there isn't really an alternative, is there? When you have such a compressed season as we have for the clubs, along with the international calendar, there literally, we've spoken about this before, there is no wiggle room for games that finish in a tie like that in order for a replay to be allowed. So when you can't facilitate a replay, you must have a winner on the day. It's the only way to do it, bar just keep the players keep playing and playing and playing.
Yeah, it is. Look, it's the equivalent to Champions Cup. Teams travel from all over Europe. A result has to be made on the day. You can't just decide we're going to meet again next Saturday and postpone a semi-final of Europe. It just doesn't work like that. I suppose then it's a question of getting the best alternative to decide the match at the end. And to be fair, this competition has gone since 1996. We've only had one other penalty shootout in that period of time, so it's extremely rare. I've heard other suggestions during the week, people talking about a golden point, for example. In other words, whoever scores first, be it a penalty, a drop goal, a try. Yeah. But let's face it, you could be going another 10 or 15 minutes before that happens. Yeah. And I've no doubt as a spectacle, it would be a joke because the players were cramping as it was at the end of the 100th minute. If you ask them to go again for a potential another 10, 12 minutes, I actually think you could do serious damage to players. Plus the fact then you're asking them to turn around and play a semi-final a week later. So I wouldn't be in favour of the golden point. In terms of the way, and we were all sort of standing there, or, I was doing the match on the radio. We knew that it was extra time. I mean, the other thing is, would you have preferred, in other words, if Toulouse had 3 tries and Munster had only 2, that would have decided it, which would have been another disastrous way to go out. The only other penalty shootout that you had in 2009, the Leicester Cardiff one, I remember that. Just 5-6 penalties. You ended up having forwards taking penalties. I remember having a chat with Martin Williams, who was the unfortunate fellow who missed the penalty. We were in New Zealand on the 2017 Lions tour. We were down in Queenstown just having a chat about good days, bad days, the vagaries of sport. And you could see he was still haunted by the fact that he missed the kick that day. At least the way it was structured the last day, you had your 6 goals like a penalty shootout. You had 3 frontline kickers, even though I wasn't sure if Dupont had ever kicked before. But sure, we should have known that fella could do anything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He could play full forward for Limerick and hurling if somebody gave him a hurling, no problem.
Yeah.
But look, it was, I think, the best way to decide it. But I did feel sorry for, like, Conor Murray's an experienced head. I felt really sorry for Ben Healy, who, is an outstanding place kicker, but he could have been a hero in normal time. He could have been a hero at the end of extra time. Then his 2 penalties just seemed to drift at the very last second. It was a horrible experience for that young fella, but I don't think anybody could have any recriminations against him or any other players.
Well, you're right. It is extremely rare. I mean, 15 years ago, as you said, the last time it happened. Still, though, I do admire the fella's optimism that they're asking James Lowe, is he willing to step up and kick for Leinster? Should it happen on back-to-back Feckin weekends this weekend? I think the chances of it happening again are so remote. But anyway, what's your thoughts, Fiona? I mean, look, it does seem cruel, as we mentioned, but it's the only viable solution, really, as Donal mentioned, when you're trying to safeguard players' protection. If you imagine another 20 minutes with Toulouse having to play with Munster for a golden point and then they have to line out again this weekend, it would be almost impossible.
No, definitely not in rugby anyway. The bodies are on the line. You could see everyone was out on their feet at the end of the game. They had absolutely nothing left in the tank. I think it's probably the only viable option. I suppose they could look at, and which is it's cruel as well. They could look at maybe first try scored would be an option, and it would enforce people maybe at times at the start of the game not going for penalties, trying to get that first try scored, and that's another cruel way. But look, I know Donal spoke about forwards going up taking kicks, and nobody wants to see that. But I even think 6 different players, it takes pressure off the one or two guys. That we saw Ben Healy, a lot was on his shoulders. We knew into Mac Dupont, maybe they weren't going to miss. If they had another 3 behind them that were taking kicks, it might have been a different story when it came to the second 3. So it's there, and there has to be something. It just was, when you're sitting in the stand, it was awful cruel to watch poor Ben Healy have to go through that. But I think this is the making of him. I think it will actually make him a much, much better player, because we know he has it in him.
Briefly on Peter Manny, Donal, before we move on, he does seem to be playing the best rugby of his career. And I don't say that lightly, but again, a bit like Fiona mentioned, I watched him last Saturday. I mean, almost single-handedly sometimes take on the Toulouse pack, and he did have a lot of support, but he stood out head and shoulder. He really is a player in form at the moment.
I think he's playing the best rugby of his life. I think there was a period there about 18 months ago when he came under a lot of scrutiny. Obviously, the emergence of so many incredible back row forwards, like Leinster have 5 or 6 of them alone. You have Timoney up in the north, a couple more in Connacht. Jack O'Donoghue was a fellow playing out of his skin for the last 2 years, and because of the element of competition, can't get into that national squad. But you can go one way or the other. When you reach that kind of 32, 33 age bracket in your career, you can be sour and you can sort of begrudge the younger fellas who are coming up behind you, or you can embrace your role and you can add value in every way you can. So I think it started for Peter at international level. If you go to the Six Nations, he wasn't a starter in most of those games, but he, off the field, apparently was outstanding in terms of his contribution, his leadership, his capacity to work with the likes of Caelan Doris and Josh van der Fleer. And then every time he came on, he made a massive impact. I think that drove him more then. When he went back, obviously he was starting with Munster. And I think he said, fine, to Andy Farrell, you have a role for me here, but I'm not prepared to go quietly. And that's the way that he's played. He's been carrying a couple of knocks as well. I remember speaking to his dad after the Exeter game, and his body was in pieces. He didn't play, I think, whatever game it was at the Ulster game in Ravenhill. He didn't play, but he was unbelievable the last day. I mean, I haven't seen anybody who has the capacity to understand and recognise within a sort of a split second when you go for a ball, in terms of, when you see the opportunity to go for a poach or when it's not on and you stay out. His understanding of that, I think, is better than anyone I've seen. His line-out ability has always been there. But I think you go back to Exeter and you go back to Toulouse. What was the thing that kept Munster in those games, kept them competitive? It was their work at the breakdown. I mean, Munster had 19 turnovers on Saturday. I mean, that's incredible. When you consider you might have only 10 lineouts in a match, that's 19 possessions. That's 19 possessions where you've actually pilfered the ball from the opposition. So psychologically, it's huge. The defensive stand that Munster had in that second half, and three of the 4 poaches that Peter O'Mahony had, I think, were within about 10 metres of the try line. So they were massively significant. And then when you're in a cauldron like the Aviva, where you have 40,000 Munster supporters, winning a turnover was as good as scoring a try. Yeah. I mean, it just energised everyone. And that's the difference, I think, between a game like last weekend, where 40,000 people are fully engaged in the match, and some of the internationals that you get in the Aviva, where people are there to kind of be entertained. It's a day out. They're going in and out of the bar. Everybody in that crowd was 100% engaged by what was happening on the pitch, and that made for an unbelievable atmosphere. That meant that every small significant game, be it, like Fiona highlighted, the scrum, and the scrum was under severe pressure from the outset. But then there was one or two where when John Ryan came on initially, Munster got 2 big gains. They got 2 penalties. Again, the crowd sensed how vital and how important. So from that point of view, I just think it was an unbelievable occasion. And Peter O'Mahony doesn't need to do any more to sort of cement his position at the greats of Munster rugby. But that performance will go down as one of the all-time greats.
Absolutely. And his mindset, it has to rub off as well, Fiona. I mean, as Donal said, he could have been sour and bitter like you were towards the end of the stages of your career, but he's gone the opposite way, and he's embraced the challenge around. And I'm looking at Alex Kendellen, and he's the future. Like, he's the next generation. He's a freak of an athlete as well, by the way, Kendellen. But that has to rub off on the younger guys like Kendellen, like Hodnett, who are on the pitch watching this guy do what he does, right?
Yeah, and they can see the heart and the passion that he brings as well. And that's something that, you mightn't see at times. These young guys mightn't feel it as much as would have gone on in the past. But if you can see Peter O'Mahony out there, I mean, Josh Wycherley, I think, latched onto a ball early on as well, a couple of meters out, and everyone just stood up and shouted. And you have the likes of Peter O'Mahony at training and exactly, showing you, okay, you don't go in there. It's hard to coach when to know to go in for that poach. It's a very hard thing. He has that natural instinct. And if you're watching him training and you have him beside you, it's definitely going to rub off. And especially in these big games, they saw the accolades he got, and the crowd. And as a player, you want to be that person coming off the pitch with your toe in your 2 shoulders and having everybody standing up and going mad.
Right, okay, we'll move on to Leinster if we can, because they're obviously playing this weekend against Toulouse, and not so much to say really about the Leicester performance, Donal, other than that they were very comfortable. They never really had to get out of kind of third gear. First half, it was almost done and dusted by that stage. So again, they're going into this an awful lot fresher than the French club are, and you'd have to make Leinster favourites in Dublin, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no doubt about that. But look, you've got to tip your hat. I mean, there's two schools of thought in terms of, a lot has been made of the fact that Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster kept all their frontline troops at home for that 3 weeks when they were when the other lads were in South Africa. But there's an element then, you go into a cauldron like Welford Road, where I think 14 of the Leicester team had started against Bristol Bears the previous weekend. So they're battle hardened. They know exactly what's coming. And, there's a question mark, will Leinster be able to get up to speed early on? Oh, you mentioned, obviously, I was heading home straight after the match. So by the time the penalty shootout and everything was over, I was in the car, turned on the radio to listen to the Leinster game on the way down. 20 minutes into the game, they were 20 points up. I mean, it was game over. It was phenomenal. I obviously watched the game back when I came home, but I just think Leinster are so clinical. No, I didn't think Leicester, to be fair, they've turned the corner under Borthwick this year. But when you looked at the team and you looked at the makeup of their pack, I couldn't see anything other than a Leinster victory prior to this game. But I think the manner with which they blew the Tigers away in the opening 20 minutes just left Leicester shocked. Now, to be fair to Leicester, they came out of the second half, they responded. But even though Leinster on the scoreline lost the second half, they were never stressed, they were never under pressure. And you talk about the breakdown and, the O'Mahony's influence in Dublin. You look at the quality of Leinster's breakdown work, the speed of their recycle. I mean, everybody's talking about what a brilliant game Gibson Park had, and he's been playing great rugby this year. But all of that is facilitated by the quality of ball that they get at the breakdown. And every single Leinster player, it's a carry-on almost from the Joe Schmidt era, when that was Ireland's point of difference. I think Leinster have brought this up to another level. I think Stuart Lancaster has been, I think Hugh Hogan was involved in that. Dennis Leamy is in there now. But they have brought their breakdown skills to a different level. And while everybody works on their set piece and all that, the breakdown is where it's at the moment. And the quality and the speed of their recycle, that is what's giving them the edge in the games. That plus, I think, their ability to do the basic things so well. But when you look across the board, I mean, 13, I think, was it Ross Maloney and Jimmy O'Brien were the only two players starting that didn't feature in the Six Nations. I mean, that's not a bad starting point for any team.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not. And I don't know what it does say. It doesn't say anything about the strength and depth of the Premiership, Fiona, once again, where you don't have English clubs involved. And look, if you take Saracens out of the picture, right, and this is not to be blunt about it, if you take Saracens out of the picture of the last 10 years, the English clubs have massively underachieved for the value in which they put their own league, if you get me. So I don't know what that says about where the English game is at, but you can take nothing away from Leinster, I guess.
No, you could take nothing against Leinster, but definitely those English clubs. I mean, we saw Leicester against Connacht. Connacht could have beaten them twice as well. We saw Sale at the weekend. They were absolutely nowhere near racing. So I don't think the English love their league and all that, but I do wonder when they come to Europe, I expect bigger games. I know we have seen big, massive games, especially Leinster over the years, but I just thought Leinster were very clinical in that first half against Leicester. I think they took the foot off the pedal a little bit in the second half, and you obviously had the Ashton try, and they gave Ford a little bit more space, so that's an area they will obviously have to tighten up, because they won't be able to do that against this team next week, against Toulouse next week. But Leinster are just so clinical. I mean, Van der Fleer, that lovely try off the maul, their set piece seems to be going well, everything is taken over them, and as Donal said, the speed of ball at the breakdown, they've really worked on that. The footwork, I think it's more the footwork in the carries around that's getting them into these spaces, and the ball placement, it's giving Gibson Park the ball and the plate, and they just seem to have, from 1 to 15, when they play against teams, you would nearly have the whole Leinster squad on your team.
Yeah, what's your thoughts then on this weekend then, Fiona, to lose it? Would you have, as Donal said, would you have Leinster favourites to go and do it?
Yeah, You'd have to, and they're playing good rugby, as I said. Toulouse, obviously, after back of 100 minutes of rugby, have gone home. Will have to come back. Can they produce? We know Toulouse can produce magic moments. We know their pack is absolutely immense. I'm not too sure. I think Ross Maloney's obviously good. I think I've heard chatter maybe James Ryan injury, so the second row could be an area, and the scrum might be somewhere that Toulouse might go after. But Leinster just seem to have guys coming through that are ready to go. I know Baird was probably due to play a bit of with Leinster A at the weekend, but he could be someone called upon now as well. Who knows? But I think Leinster at home in the Viva, if they can bring the fans, bring the noise, they'll have a great game of rugby, and Toulouse won't be able to keep up with the back three, especially Keenan was immense again.
What about the next season's competition, Donald? Just to kind of take some wider points in the game this week. So we know that there's going to be 4 pool matches for the Champions Cup next season. There won't be the home and away last 16 leg. So you're going effectively from 4 pool games into the last 16 knockout straight through to the final then. Is that more or less what you expected?
Yeah, it's what I expected, but I don't like the format, to be honest with you. I think one of the issues here, you see, the competition was expanded about 3 years ago from 20 to 24 teams. Half of that was due to the COVID issues. Leagues weren't finished properly. Then you had the introduction of the back-to-back. Initially, the back-to-back games were supposed to be brought in at the quarterfinal stage. That had to be abandoned last season because of other postponements. My biggest gripe with it, I don't think there's 24 teams good enough to play in an elite European competition. That's the first thing. The second thing is, after the pool stage, you're only getting rid of 8 teams.
8 teams, yeah.
So you still, whereas in the old pool stages, it sort of separated the wheat from the chaff. You had your 6 pool matches, but you were straight into a quarterfinal. So you were into that elite of 8 teams. Now we have this kind of a holding block, if you like, where we go from 24 to 16, and then we go to 8.
So you're in danger, Donald, then of becoming like the Champions League in football, effectively, where nobody really pays attention to the group stages because everyone knows that the action really only kicks in when you reach the knockout stages. You have 24 teams competing for 16 positions here, which effectively means, like this year, you can have a side that loses 2 or 3 games and still gets through to the next round.
Absolutely. I mean, I think somebody said Ulster only lost 1 game, and they failed to make the quarterfinal. Yeah, you know what I mean. It's no, I thought the back-to-back brought something different. I'd love to see where you get to a scenario from the pool stage where you go straight to a quarterfinal and have a back-to-back in those quarterfinals, because the difference between a home and an away fixture at that level is incredible. And, you could be unlucky in terms of, you could have one really rubbish team in your pool and everybody puts up 50 points against them. And that's the difference between getting the home and away match. The other aspect that we haven't spoken about is the fact you're now going to have 3 South African teams in the pool stage or in the European Cup next year. As a concept, is it right? I mean, is a European Cup, how do you have a European Cup with 3 South African teams in it? The vagaries of the draw, we could be going up and down. I mean, it's bad enough driving to Dublin every weekend, like having to go up and down to South Africa every second.
Yeah, but you hate Dublin. You hate Dublin.
Not at all. I've many a good night in Dublin, as you know.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? I mean, we're talking about, is it right? It's probably a debate for another day, but is it right that South African teams are going to be competing in Europe? No. The only thing I would say, we probably need them on the basis that the Welsh and the Italian teams have been so awful this year that there's no doubt, and we see how they've improved in the URC. And I mean, it's going to be incredible that last round of games in the URC is going to be incredible in terms of who gets their home quarterfinals. So it's a difficult one, and I know we'll talk down the road about the potential for a new international competition, so you could have South African teams competing in the rugby championship, say the Springboks in the rugby championship and the world championship, but the provincial sides playing in the URC and in Europe. It just doesn't sit right.
No, it doesn't. And I like Donal's idea of a home and away quarterfinal, Fiona, because that would, really put a premium and an emphasis on the pool stage. If you have 24 teams vying for 8 positions and you're getting rid of everybody else, and then you would still have the extra round with the home and away with the quarterfinals, but it just means the best teams will get through to the knockout stage. This just seems like, sure, everyone can get through, and sure, the group stages don't matter really,
No, that's it. And I love the idea. I mean, we saw the best games of rugby in those two-legged ties this year. But I suppose you have to look at with the South African teams now. And if you did have that home and away, do you want to be going over to an away game in South Africa in 5 days and have to adjust to altitude and all that kind of stuff? So I think with the South African teams in there, that definitely got rid of that idea. But yeah, I'm totally agreeing with Donal about there's too many teams. We saw some of the group stages, some of the games this year, teams didn't need to win, and we didn't see the level and quality of rugby. Cut it down, and it makes the competition far more enjoyable. In each game, then we see an absolute belter.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Yeah, well, look, we'll do it, I guess.
I think, Hugh, to be fair, the adjustments, URC or EPCR as they are now, they've actually done a great job in getting the tournament to the stage that we're at now because of all the, remember a couple of months ago, the 28 nils and the postponements and all that type of thing. So it has been incredibly difficult. And I think there will be a period of adjustment, but I would strongly argue for going back to 20 teams, 6 games at the pool stage, straight into your quarterfinal. If you had the scope to have another game by doing home and away in the quarterfinal, so be it. I mean, having that, the second leg, you do get a reward for finishing higher for having the second leg at home. But look, that's for another day. But I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that it has been incredibly challenging for the EPCR to get to the stage where we're at now. And you have to say, we've arrived here with 4 incredibly exciting teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Regardless of how we get there, I guess. Right, let's just also talk about the annual calendar, if you like, in an international structure, Donal, before we leave it, because there's meetings taking place in Dublin for the chief stakeholders this week about trying to align the season, the structure of the season, I suppose, with a stronger pathway for developing nations. So essentially what they're proposing is a nations championship, which will consist of 2 divisions. The top division would have 12 teams, 6 from each hemisphere, north and south, playing in the summer and the autumn slots. So, and ultimately ending them with a grand final. From what you know of this, does it seem to make sense in terms of aligning the season and the seasons together, north and south, and the annual calendar? And also, I guess, look, because we're dealing with a professional game here, it does seem like this is going to try and generate money for Southern Hemisphere teams which badly need it, and equally to try and promote the developing nations to have them more on a par with their better international sides, if you like. Your overall thoughts on whether or not this would work?
Yeah, look, I was very interested in the concept when it was first put on the table about 3 or 4 years ago. And basically what they're doing is they're looking to generate more revenue. The Southern Hemisphere countries, the big countries, Australia, New Zealand in particular, are struggling to survive. And the bottom line is international rugby needs the All Blacks at their best. They need Australia to be competitive. Then you have that middle tier, Japan. Japan beat Scotland and Ireland in the last World Cup. They beat South Africa in the 2015 World Cup. So therefore, you're going to have to get meaningful competition for them. There is an imbalance in that, like, it drives New Zealand bananas. They come up, they play in Twickenham. The rugby union generate about 15 million is their return from that one game alone. New Zealand, they get their expenses paid. Like, when Ireland go down we have a 3-test tour this summer, New Zealand generate nothing like that kind of money for all kinds of reasons. So therefore, you've got to have an incentivization for the likes of Japan, for Fiji, for Samoa and these countries to bring them up to a level. What I like about this is it brings more meaning to the summer tours, because in effect, what's going to happen is this Nations Cup, which is played every in the non-Lions and the non-World Cup year. Okay, yeah. So it's only 2 in every 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens? Let's say Ireland are going to New Zealand this summer. They're playing 3 tests. Instead of that happening, they'd play a test against New Zealand, they'd play a test against Australia, and they'd play a test against Japan in this nation's competition. Then in the autumn block, they'd play against the other countries that they hadn't played. So that would be, say, South Africa, Argentina, and Fiji. And then the results of those overall, you have a final or you have a second or third place or whatever. So it brings, I think, more meaning to the summer tours. Now, that said, you have to say, is there an element then that you lose the opportunity to blood younger players to take them away? Because every game, you have the Six Nations, you have June, and you have November. If every game is involved in a competition, where do you get the chance to blood younger players? But that said, sometimes you pick a guy against Fiji or Romania in a test in November, and what does it mean? You beat them by 60, 70 points. I mean, that doesn't tell you a whole lot either. Overall, I think it's something has to change in the rugby calendar. Of course, the big carrot in this is they reckon it'll generate about 40% more revenue across the board. And given what's happened with the pandemic, the game is hemorrhaging money. The English clubs, one of the reasons they're not as competitive as they were, there's a salary cap introduced in for the Gallagher Premiership, which reduces their squad spend from 6.5 million to 5 million. Like they say, the Welsh regions nearly have more money than that. So there's a myriad of problems facing the game, and I think that this is a step in the right direction. It brings the second-tier countries in as well, and you have meaningful competition at international level across the board, and that global calendar is becoming more in line.
Yeah, and I guess it does allow the pathway for promotion for those second-tier nations, Fiona, to come up, which is crucial as well. I mean, there's no point saying you're trying to develop some of the weaker nations and have no pathway to try and compete against the top levels. When CVC bought into the game, I guess this was always on the cards, along with the fact that we do need, I guess, a different structure for everyone across the board annually anyway. But with CVC at the helm, 40% more revenue, as Donal said, it's going to make an awful lot of sense to a lot of people, right?
Yeah, money is the main talking point, isn't it? And that's just the nature of the game. I think it's a really good idea. I mean, I'm watching the Super Rugby. You've got Fiji, Juani. Like, these teams are really competing. They're putting it up to the Australian and New Zealand teams over there. And they're a lot. They're very similar to what the national squads would look like. So they need a competition to aim for. They need the revenue, and I think this is the right idea. My only issue would be player welfare. Obviously, they'll be talked, and that was an issue that came up in the past. Like, it's an overload of games. But I think, as Donal said, as nations going into this, you have to view it as a way of blooding players as well. You can't just be flogging these guys that are coming from a Leinster, Munster team because you want to win these competitions, or you want to beat the All Blacks, or you want to beat Australia. You need to use it as a way to get these guys game time that are coming up through the ranks, the likes of Thomas Ahern, Ken Dillon. They need to be playing those games as well, and it's better for them to play those games than to be going out beating the likes of Georgia or Romania or whoever by 50, 60 points, or Canada. So it is really, really good idea. It's just how the coaching staff and the teams look at it, because we know at November international time and summer tour, that's where guys get caps, and it needs to continue like that as well. They need to get a feel for that international rugby to be able to take that step forward.
Okay, great stuff, guys. As always, live coverage of Leinster against Toulouse on RTÉ Radio 1 this weekend and online. Check out the RTÉ Sport website for all the latest stories and the build-up. And we might talk next week more about Ronan O'Gara, because La Rochelle once again in the semi-final, and Ronan O'Gara's coaching powers show no sign whatsoever of slowing down. But for the moment, Donal and Fiona, thanks so much for your time.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.